Following yesterday's accident and the body received by Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu and his country started to have all of these dramatic statements. Oh look, Hamas are cheating, they're not giving us the bodies that we want, this is not the body of that woman, and we're gonna go with full force and we were gonna annihilate Gaza, to a level where some people started just to ridicule the man. Especially from those who were families of the Israeli prisoners of war in Gaza, saying, we're sick of your talk already about we are going to do this and we're going to do that. Stop it already. We just want our people back. Get this over and done with. But Benjamin Netanyahu, it was a very tough day for him yesterday, because the man is responsible for killing his own people inside of Gaza because of his country's barbaric crimes in American weapons. And he wants to cover things up. So we've had this attack in Tel Aviv, a couple of explosives in several buses near Tel Aviv, with Israel imposing military censorship on everything. Reports in Israel are saying that 3 Israelis were arrested yesterday, but they're not elaborating, they're not giving more information. All they said, oh, we found a parcel, it said it's from Tul Karam in the West Bank. Benjamin Netanyahu posts a video of himself today with some of his terrorists in the West Bank saying that, oh yeah, we're here, we're after the Hamas, we're going to continue with this and that. Where is he taking photos and images? Houses of civilian Palestinians. Today, the images that they released from the West Bank is the ultimate representation of the State of Israel. A fake entity based on falsehoods and stealing, creating a false narrative and moving away as if, everything is normal. He was having these threats from the West Bank against everyone, and especially against the Hamas. All of that is intended to cover up his failure and to take down the criticism that's coming against him following the arrival of the Israeli bodies from Gaza, because Benjamin Netanyahu, he wanted to delay as much as possible the release of Israeli bodies because it wouldn't look as an image of victory for him. Not that he has any image of victory, really. It's only an image of defeat when it comes to Netanyahu. But he tried to delay it as much as possible. However, now he's talking about the West Bank and escalating. And, people are tense. Is it going to continue? Is it not going to continue? Despite all of that, on the ground, things are moving forward. Firstly, the Palestinian resistance elaborated regarding the body that apparently wasn't of that Israeli woman. And Hamas, actually, there was a report that Hamas handed the Red Cross another body. And they said there could have been an accident. Return the body for us, please. We'll give you the other body. And it happened. And things are still going ahead. We are expected to see more Palestinians being released, more Israelis being released. And there's more talk coming from the United States and from everyone about moving on with Phase 2, confirmations in Israel based on various reports that Phase 2 is going to continue. It's going to be more challenging. There are certain proposals to do with the release of all of the alive Israelis in one knock rather than in multiple stages. However, of course, no one is following the actual demands and offers that came from the Palestinian resistance from day one, which is an all-out deal, everyone in exchange for everyone. Benjamin Netanyahu did not want to do that, and instead he got this show of Hamas every single week, sending messages every single week, not just Israel, but to the whole population, messages of power from Gaza. It's affecting him, but he still doesn't want to go ahead with a full deal. Why? Because he wants to protect himself and protect his government. Smotrich told him, if you're not going to go back full force to the war, and if you go in Phase 2, I'm going to be resigning. He's trying to play on every rope, Benjamin Netanyahu. And now his trick is delaying this Phase 1 thing. So apparently, and again, this is an assumption because the details of the ceasefire agreement haven't been released. Apparently, there's a clause in the ceasefire that may allow a certain delay up until an agreement on Phase 2 is reached. Now, this proposal is a follow-up from Joe Biden's proposal from last year. Biden himself, in his speech, said, if no agreement is reached in Phase 1 surrounding phase 2, the ceasefire will continue. So we won't go back to war. It looks like this might be the case this time. And Benjamin Netanyahu wants to delay as much as possible the reaching of the phase 2 agreement. He wants to delay that as much as possible. But things are moving ahead. Now, the talks that are coming now, both from Israel and from the United States, are mainly surrounding Hamas. Witkoff is saying talks are going ahead, it's going to be a little bit more challenging. And the difficult point is that Israel is very keen on Hamas not remaining in Gaza. Now, when it comes to Hamas remaining in Gaza, of course that's an illusion. But there's certain terminology being used here. At one point, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu was saying, we want to eliminate the Hamas. Before, that was one of his aims. That's, of course, visible to everyone that it's not going to happen. Now there's more terminology being introduced. And when it comes to agreements, it's all about the terminology. What kind of words we're going to use that can be interpreted to the way that both sides can agree on. Now, terms like Hamas not being the governing authority. Hamas not being in power. Technically, Hamas, they don't have a problem with not being the governing authority officially. If there can be another Palestinian national authority concerned with all of the interests of the Palestinian people, so long as no one takes away their strength in Gaza, especially when it comes to armed resistance. Everyone saw how much that is required and that's necessary in front of a lethal genocidal terror entity supported by bigger terror forces globally. You need people to protect the Palestinian population, to prevent Israel from achieving its objectives of the war. If there was no resistance in Gaza, Israel would have taken over Gaza like nothing. What's leading the world to these moments, what's leading us to a ceasefire now, is the fact that there have been people inside of Gaza standing up against Israel, saying no, and because of how much they survived and went through and remained there and kept resisting Israel, they managed to enforce this ceasefire against Israel, with Israel. Despite, again, all of the problems in the ceasefire, by the way, breaches, delay of certain things, at the end of the day, you're dealing with Israel. I mean, the name itself speaks volumes. Supported by the United States, powers killed millions across the world. So, but it's still going ahead. It's still going ahead, but there's a very big problem with the image and how things are sold and portrayed to the global public. Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to show as if it's a massive loss. The United States wants to give that image to him. From a Palestinian side, they're not too worried about certain things to do with images that can be interpreted by Israel in a certain way, so long as the interest of the Palestinian people is there and it's met. And of course, the red lines of the Palestinian resistance are, there's no way that we're going to be disarmed, and there's no way any of the leaders of the resistance are leaving Gaza. These people prove to everyone we'd die in our land defending it, and we won't go anywhere. The people who should be going back to where they came from are those who established the state of Israel with this fake nationality, fake entity, fake names, pseudo-history. Now, the talks are about phase 2, but there are talks about potentially going back to the war. What are these talks surrounding exactly? How realistic are they? And is there genuine willingness from Benjamin Netanyahu to go back to war? That is the main question. Is Benjamin Netanyahu really interested in going back to a war with Gaza? Because if he is, then he can and he will. And the Israeli army will have to follow suit. Netanyahu dictated everything in Israel for the past 15 months, up until we reached a stage of a ceasefire. Then again, there was an argument that the US administration applied some pressure. There's an argument that, well, even if they did apply pressure and he didn't want to, he wouldn't have gone ahead with it. There are two arguments here. But he still went with the ceasefire agreement. Is he interested in going back to a full-scale war? there isn't a lot to support that at the moment. Technically he can. The man committed a genocide. There is no need to further elaborate or clarify when it comes to Israel's barbarism. And there is no need to clarify further when it comes to the United States, in relation to the United States and its position and its global support of this mass terror. Benjamin Netanyahu wants to keep things sweet between him and his coalition. He knows that an immediate ending, a very quick ending of everything to do with the war is problematic for him, for his government. Therefore, he would try and find a way to delay entering phase 2, because he's about buying time now. We're in the beginning of 2025. He wants this year to pass slowly. He doesn't want quick elections. He wants to get himself together and get out of this victorious somehow. Now that's the problem here. How is he going to go out victorious? So we might see a delay, not necessarily going back to a full-scale war. What he might do is have certain breaches of the ceasefire without necessarily going into Gaza, because the fact that Israel withdrew after 15 months of all of this war, all of this genocide inside of Gaza, they eliminated anything that they can translate as a military accomplishment on the ground, although there is none apart from destruction. But let's say their presence in certain parts of Gaza, they want to explain that or interpret that as a military achievement. We are inside of Gaza. No one can argue that they were inside of Gaza. Were they based properly? Were they safe? Were they protected? Were they controlling things properly? That's a different argument. But they were in Gaza. You withdrew. You withdrew from Gaza. You gave the Palestinian resistance breathing space. You gave them a chance to regroup, rearm, deploy everywhere, go back everywhere they want. You gave them a chance to go everywhere apart from the perimeter so far, or the buffer zone. And the reports are coming from Israel. The armed members of Hamas are next to the IDF soldiers near the perimeter, and the IDF can't do anything against them because the agreement prevents them from having any attacks against Hamas. How can Benjamin Netanyahu, after doing all of that, convince anyone to go back into Gaza? From an Israeli perspective, Hamas could have now planted the explosive all across of Gaza, just waiting for Israel to go back again. Is he going to do that? The second question is, what is he going to achieve? And the third and biggest problematic thing is the fact that in Israel, people are watching now. People are seeing what's happening. People are seeing that there is a progress and Israelis are being released. And how is this happening? This is happening by talks. This is happening by talking with Hamas. This is happening through negotiations. And this is happening with pressure on Israel and on Benjamin Netanyahu. And the biggest pressure is from the Palestinian people in Gaza, from the Palestinian resistance, and of course at that time, before the ceasefire, the supporting fronts. And now it's also with the mediators taking action to continue down phase 2. And there's more, of course, Arab movement to rebuild Gaza without the forced displacement and do it in a relatively quick manner. However, Donald Trump and Israel are still selling these illusions and fantasies of expelling the population, although they've been trying to expel the population for the past 60 years in Gaza, and it didn't work. So the population in Israel are looking at what's happening, and Benjamin Netanyahu is receiving a lot of criticism because he's not releasing everyone all at once. The talk in Israel now, especially from the families of the prisoners of war and those in Israel who oppose the continuation of the war, is we are seeing that people are being released. Hamas indeed is releasing them. You killed Benjamin Netanyahu, you and your army, you killed more Israeli prisoners of war unnecessarily when you refuse to accept the ceasefire that you could have accepted over 7 months back. And that's a massive pressure on its own. So the people in Israel are protesting in the streets during this phase because from their point of view, they can't guarantee that their relatives will be alive. And they can't guarantee that Benjamin Netanyahu won't go to the war again. Because he proved to them in the past year and a half that he doesn't care about the people's lives. All he cares about is his political interest, his political survival, and dodging law enforcement, dodging the courts in Israel for as long as possible, up until he imposes his view in the Israeli judicial system and gets away with anything that he wants to. And that is very problematic. It's problematic because it's alive now, it's happening live. Everyone is seeing it in Israel. People are happy that they're getting their relatives from Gaza inside of Israel. And there are others who are still bitter and very anxious that they may not. All of these three things are pressure points on Netanyahu. They apply pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu to continue down the path of the ceasefire. However, he doesn't want it to be a quick and swift ceasefire. He wants to create problems, he wants to create tensions, he wants to create delays, and he wants to be viewed still as the man who protects Israel, who protects Israel's security, who protects Israel's sovereignty. He cannot go all at once and finish this war and be left with criticism from the Israeli public. And during the process, he is making very important changes inside of Israel. Although not many reports are talking about them, but Benjamin Netanyahu, he applied pressure alongside his cabinet on the previous Israeli Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi to resign. He applied pressure on the previous Defense Minister to resign. Both of them resigned. Both of them were replaced by yes men in the Israeli army and the Defense Minister too. Now he's doing that with the head of the Shin Bet or the Shabak and the head of the Mossad. And we already started to see that being implemented. Now there were already reports from Israel months back that he was applying pressure to sack all of them. But he didn't want to do everything all at once. Again, to delay and not to get too much criticism all at once. But now the most notable thing that we saw in recent days is the fact that the man leading the negotiations on phase 2 is not the head of the Mossad, and the head of the Shabak, Ronen Bar, is not there. He's not with them. Who's leading it? Ron Dermer. Ron Dermer, a very close person, an aide to Benjamin Netanyahu. And Benjamin Netanyahu is actually considering putting him instead of the head of the Mossad at one point, as the head of the Israeli Mossad. Another yes man in the negotiations. Now, is this yes man being planted in the negotiating delegation team or leading it in Israel so that he can prevent things from moving forward? No, that's not his purpose. His purpose is to fully abide by Benjamin Netanyahu's timeline. Benjamin Netanyahu is very concerned about the timeline. He is very concerned about things moving too fast. He previously criticized the delegation. He publicly had criticism against the negotiating delegation, said to everyone that you don't know how to negotiate, only I know how to negotiate. He banned them from having negotiations. At one point, he stripped them of any legitimacy, and he did not give them the authority in many cases to reach a deal. And that's a very important point. If Benjamin Netanyahu has Ron Dermer, he can dictate when Ron Dermer is authorized without scrutiny, by the way. When is he ordered to go to the actual ceasefire negotiations on phase 2? when he can agree, when he cannot agree, what kind of problems he should plant, what kind of sticks he should put in the wheels, and at which point. Benjamin Netanyahu wants to dictate all of that. All of those things proved to be more and more difficult as time went by when it comes to the head of the Mossad. The head of the Mossad, the head of the Shabak, they were more problematic to control. And Benjamin Netanyahu wants ultimate and full control. Therefore, you have Ron Dermer going now and negotiating, not to collapse the ceasefire agreement, but only to make it as suitable as possible for Benjamin Netanyahu. All of that indicates that the progress when it comes to the ceasefire is there. Things are still being implemented on the ground. And the first test of how successful the ceasefire actually is when the first stage officially ends. This is where we will see if Israel goes back to intense war or has far more breaches than before, or will there be a quiet period, as was stated during the Biden era. And of course, the reports are this whole ceasefire agreement was based on the proposal of Joe Biden. So there's a lot of drama in the media. However, on the ground, things are still moving forward, and we're still expected to see more prisoner exchanges and potentially an extension of phase 1 unless a quick agreement is reached on phase 2.